thank you for coming to this first of the 3 nights of our parish mission. I want to welcome you and thank you especially for taking the time to, again, cultivate your faith, to let it grow stronger during this Lenten season so that we will bloom together as a beautiful resurrection community at and during the Easter season. Tonight and for the next 2 nights, our leader for the parish mission is going to be Mr. Andy Otto. Now, Andy has designed this parish mission with us in mind. We sat down maybe about 2 months ago, I think, and we talked about how this parish community is part of the La Salette family community. And the apparition of Mary at La Salette in 1846 came with the message to pray well, to reconcile ourselves with God, and to become joyous disciples of the gospel in the world. So I brought that to Andy, and Andy took off with it and has created this beautiful 3-night mission, which will help us to do and learn how to do better each of those wonderful Lenten works. Andy is part of the pastoral team at Ignatius House, and he works also in the adult faith formation community at St. Thomas More Church in Decatur. He holds a master's degree in theology and ministry from Boston College, a great place, great place. Our students are going, I didn't go there, but our students are going there starting in September for their theological education. Originally from the Boston area, that's another thing you got good, that's great. Father Joe will love that. Andy spent 3 years as a Jesuit studying for the priesthood, which helped him form his love for the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola, and you'll learn something about that during his presentation in the 3 nights. During that time, he's taught primary school students in Syracuse, New York, and in Kingston, Jamaica. He's worked at a palliative care cancer hospital, bringing, I'm sure, spiritual and practical and careful love to those who were suffering from cancer. He's also worked as a chaplain at Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. Some of, I'm sure, his experiences will flow into his presentation. He's also the creator of the website godinallthings.com. It's great. I've checked it out. There's many wonderful spiritual experiences to look at that he's a part of in that. He also, there's a podcast on there that he's put together. And he's also author of the book, God Moments, Unexpected Encounters in the Ordinary, which is how we want to find God most especially. He's also written a number of articles, which you'll find on his website, godinallthings.com, such things as the oxygen of the spiritual life and enkindling the world before Lent, marking God's goodness and Advent waiting. Those are just some of the articles which have some great spiritual insights in them that you can find by going to that website. Andy's wife, Sarah, also is a retreat director over at Ignatius House, and she was just here, I understand, a couple of weeks ago, giving the evening of reflection for our St. Anne's Women's Guild. So there's a great creative couple there who are sparking the church in many, many ways in the spiritual life with great enthusiasm. So with that in mind, I introduce to you tonight Andy Otto.
Thank you, Father Ray. A welcome to you, and thank you for welcoming me so warmly. He mentioned articles or blog posts that I don't even remember, probably because they were so long ago. But before we sing a couple opening songs, let's start with a little bit of prayer experience. That is the theme for this evening. The Jesuit tradition that I come from encourages a daily prayerful look at how God is present and working in our everyday life. Things we do each day, the people that we meet. And St. Ignatius, who founded the Jesuits, called this the examen prayer. And so as a way of opening the evening, I'd like us to sit quietly and reflect on this. So I'll offer a prompt or two, and then we'll have a short pause of silence in between for your own quiet reflection. So let us first quiet ourselves, quiet our hearts, put aside the busyness of the day, maybe take a breath or two, and you may want to close your eyes if that helps you focus. Let yourself slow down and forget for a moment about the concerns of your day. Imagine for a moment God looking down upon us this evening. God is present. God is here, holding us, loving us. Now think back on your day to one moment that made you happy, that gave you joy. Maybe it was a conversation with a friend, or a place you went, or something you did. Maybe it was something tiny. What was that one small, joyful moment from today? Now think of a moment from today when you felt sad or disconnected or stressed or lonely. Thank God for both of these moments, moments that can help you grow into a more loving person. Know that God was present in both of those moments, with you, feeling your feelings along with you. In your heart, ask God for what you need or hope for tomorrow. More patience, greater love, ability to forgive, trust in God. Whatever you need, just silently ask God for it. Now, open your eyes and return to the present moment. As we sing out in praise and love to our God.
Into the darkness This time, before we begin, I'd like to invite the children, all the middle schoolers, Edge, to go to the left of the altar where Kelly is standing, and they're going to have their breakout session over there. And then on this side, on the piano side, all the launch kids, I think it's 3 through, kindergarten through not Edge, is over on this side. And at this time, you guys will break to go to your locations. And then when you guys come back up, you're going to find your parents, all right?
I think the kindergartners should stay here. Thank you, Ed. That's beautiful. As I as I was putting my phone up here just so I could see the time, I saw a text from my wife saying that she and my 2-year-old are watching the live stream. So, hi Eva, hi Sarah. There you go. As Father Ray mentioned, I was a Jesuit for nearly 3 years studying for the priesthood. And the call came pretty unexpectedly for me one day when I was perusing a Jesuit vocation site for some reason. And this was a time in my life where I was rapidly growing in my faith. I had a girlfriend who went to a non-denominational church. She was very much alive in her own faith and her own spirituality. So there's this time of growth for me. But I always figured I'd get married. So this calling was not only a surprise to my family, but also to me. There's a story of the parents who wanted to find out what their new child's future would be. So one day after Mass, they went to their parish priest and asked his advice on what they should do. And he said, well, put before him a Bible, $1, and a bottle of whiskey. And if he takes the Bible, well, he'll be a priest. And if he takes the $1, well, he'll be a banker. And if he takes the bottle of whiskey, well, he'll be a bum. So they followed the priest's, albeit bad, advice, and they put those 3 items before the child. Well, the next week they went back to the church, and the priest said, well, how did it go? And they said, well, we put the items before him, the Bible, the $1, and the bottle of whiskey, and he took all of them. What does that mean? Ah, the priest said, a Jesuit. So my time in the Jesuits was amazing. I lived some of the year in the novitiate in Syracuse, and I worked for a food pantry and also some time in a Catholic primary school. I spent some time a summer in a Spanish immersion program in Cochabamba, Bolivia, several weeks at a parish and school in Kingston, Jamaica, and then some time as a hospital chaplain at Georgetown Hospital in D.C. So these ministerial experiences were amazing, and they taught me quite a lot. But what was the most profound learning from my time in religious life was learning how to pray. Now, before I entered the Jesuits, I probably would have told you that I know how to pray. I could certainly tell you that I said my prayers well, religiously. I remember as a young person when I got in bed and I was tired and I just kind of wanted to get to sleep, so I would rush through my prayers. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed. I could say my prayers, I could rattle through them pretty well. And this is how all of us start, right? We need to. Right? We need to develop a pattern of prayer that's going to set us up for a lifetime relationship with God. Even Jesus did this when he taught his disciples the Our Father, a prayer that Christians have been praying for over 2,000 years. When Mary appeared to two children in La Salette, France in 1846, one of the things that she told them was to pray well, emphasizing the Our Father and Hail Mary. But what does it mean to pray well? Is it being a good Catholic and saying our prayers and going to Mass? That's what I was taught. But Mary tells the children to pray even if you only say an Our Father and a Hail Mary. Even if. It's the minimum, the foundation. Now, religious life didn't teach me how to pray formulaic prayers, though that was part of it, but it helped me move and grow beyond that, to expand my definition of prayer from saying words and asking for things to a deep, intimate, loving relationship with God. St. Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuits, said that we can speak to God as we speak to a friend. He even encourages us imagining sitting next to Jesus and just chatting with him. Prayer for Ignatius was an encounter with God, an encounter with a God who desires closeness, intimacy with us. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says that God may be of no concern to humans, but humanity is of much concern to God. Prayer opens us up to see through God's eyes. When we speak of prayerful reflection, we're talking about examining our lives through God's loving eyes. There's an intentionality to it, a deep awareness. When we can be close enough to God and imagine seeing through God's eyes, prayer can become wordless, silent, just being with God. Our motivation for prayer becomes not some sort of obligation like it was in my childhood. It becomes a way of being. What a beautiful new way to see prayer, especially during this season of Lent, when we talk about prayer, fasting, and almsgiving as being critically important to our spiritual life. Now, if you know much about Marian apparitions, you'll know that quite often it seems that Mary chooses to appear to children. And her messages usually include some kind of call to prayer. And there's wisdom in this. Pope Francis recently said that in order to pray well, one must have the heart of a child. There's some wisdom in a childlike heart. Jesus even said, "Unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And this is not an invitation to be childish, but to do what children do well. Right? They can be quite present to what they're doing. Their ego doesn't get in the way in the same way that it might for us adults. Now, my 2-year-old daughter, who is probably tired of watching this now, is so often present, and aware that she notices the birds chirping or notices a plane flying overhead, things that I didn't even notice because I was just so caught up with the thoughts going on in my head. Her refrain lately is, "What's that sound? What's that sound?" She's so in tune with the present moment. Prayer requires this kind of attentiveness. St. Ignatius is famous for popularizing the examen prayer, which is essentially a review of your day, and we began with a variation. But it asks those questions: what have I done today? How did my heart move? Where did I fail? Where did I experience joy? Where did I sense God's presence or absence? It's a kind of prayer that requires keen awareness. It's as if you're looking back over your day with God by your side. You're sifting through your day with God and noticing. A couple months ago, when I was praying an examen one evening before bed, the moment in my day that kept coming up for me was when I arrived home from work and my daughter greeted me just so joyfully. "Dada," she said, with this big smile on her face. And my wife, who was cooking dinner that evening, had just finished dinner, and she made this amazing burger with melted pepper jack cheese and avocado on a toasted bun. It was just so good. And this was the highlight of my prayer. This was the moment where I found God the most in my day, in the love of my family and in the gift of this wonderful burger. God in all things. This kind of prayer, when made daily, can bring into focus what I believe and how I live. And I may find out that how I'm living may be quite different than what I believe. I may find that while I believe in the values of loving neighbor and being generous and kind, I'm living very differently. Prayer can bring these things into focus, like glasses, except you're given new eyes, God's eyes. I can't change or reconcile what I don't see. I begin to more clearly see my life with God and how I respond to the love of God. And we'll talk about apostolic zeal on Wednesday, but prayer should always move us to some kind of response to God, because we recognize the love and the gifts of God in prayer, and we're moved to respond. When Mary appeared to the children in La Salette, she commented, "Only a few rather old women go to Mass in the summer. Everyone else works all summer long." Kind of a funny statement from the Mother of God. Have you ever heard anyone, maybe at a Saturday wedding Mass, "Does this count for Sunday?" This last Christmas, Christmas was on a Tuesday, and I heard people complaining of how they had to go to Mass 2 days earlier, and, is this why you go to Mass? To tick the obligation box? Does your faith rest on doing the minimum? Now, it's clear y'all here tonight are not doing the minimum, right? You're here. You don't have to be here. I'm assuming you want to be here. Let's face it, when I was young, the reason I went to church on Sundays was the donuts afterwards. And now I'm getting my 2-year-old into it. But now my faith has matured. I don't do obligatory prayer. My motivation to pray and worship is a response to the love of God. It's a response to the love I have experienced from God. It comes from a response of gratitude, that when I discover that sometimes the way I live and what I believe don't match up, and God still desires my friendship, still takes great interest in me, that's why I keep this Christian thing going. Not because I have to, but because I'm moved to. You know, I don't blame many people who leave the faith for one reason or another. When we become stuck with an image of God that sees God as an angry God, one to fear, one who will only love us if we say the right prayers or do the right things, or even one who's seen more as a cosmic Santa Claus, magically doling out blessings to some people and not to others, yeah, I don't believe in that God either. But when I come to understand God as what John says, love, that I'm beloved no matter what, that God delights in who I am, that I'm always being drawn back to a friendship, that there's nothing I could do to earn or merit God's love, I can't leave something so amazing. You know, the reason the Jews care so much about a day off on Saturday and Christians care about Sunday is because of prayer. We forget that the concept of Sabbath is about prayer. Not in the sense of words, but in the sense of prayerful rest, silence, quiet, reflection, community, donuts. Why not? Why can't a Sunday afternoon reading a spiritual book quietly be prayer? Or playing with your children? Or spending quality time with your spouse? As long as those activities live within God's friendship, it's prayer. When I spend time with my family, gratitude is welled up and I'm reminded of God's love for me. When I take a walk and I feel the sunshine on my face, I'm reminded of the beauty of God's creation. This is prayer. When my wife and I sat down to discuss our goals for the new year, we were reminded of what we valued and what values God is drawing us to. That is prayer. Prayer is like tilling the garden with God. There's some examining of the plants and flowers, perhaps some weeding and uprooting. There's tilling of new soil and planting seeds, watering, sunshine. And maybe you and God take time to smell the flowers together. There's a shared project here with God. And the garden is your life, where there's some breaking and mending, uprooting and planting. There's a relationship blooming. A couple of years ago, when we witnessed our country becoming more divided, there was an ad that you might have seen that Heineken put out where they had pairs of people who had very different political or social views. They had these people come together and assemble these two stools. And the people didn't know about each other or their views. But after they had collaborated and constructed the stools, they sat on the stools and they shared a beer. And they talked about their differences. They got to know each other despite their differences. And it showed to me the importance of a shared project, in this case, building a stool. The importance of a shared project in cultivating relationships. And we may not always know God as an unconditional lover or Jesus as a friend. But when we dig in a little deeper and begin cultivating the garden with him, you might be surprised at what we'll find. Prayer is the tilling and the watering and the sunshine. It's time spent with a friend. Not just at church, not just at meals, not just before bed, but always. I know someone who told me that they often struggle to find a time for prayer. It's a common struggle. But he's been spending some time doing some things that he enjoys, like taking more photographs and hiking. Could these things be prayer? I asked him. Does he see his photography skills as a gift from God? Does he see God's beauty in the photos he takes? When he's hiking, does he pay attention to the beauty of God's creation around him? Does he encounter God in nature? Does he prayerfully reflect on these things at the end of the day? When St. Paul said to pray without ceasing, and Mary said to pray well, this is what they're talking about. It doesn't exclude liturgical prayer or petitionary prayer. Rather, it founds their purpose on this love relationship with God. Imagine a married couple, or imagine your own married or dating relationship if you're in one. Is your entire relationship based on asking your spouse to do stuff for you? I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. Probably not the most healthy relationship. Are your conversations one-sided, where one partner speaks for the entire time and shares about your life and goes on and on and on and on? Also not the most healthy dynamic. So why do we sometimes treat our relationship with God like that? Don't loving relationships share mutually? Don't they give space to listen to each other? Don't they sometimes sit in silence because they're so comfortable with each other? If I'm ever taking a walk with my wife, we might chat about the various things that are going on in our lives, or we may just walk together saying nothing. There might be other times where we point out the flowers and the trees and the beauty of the sunshine. Can we see our prayer taking on this new kind of dynamic? As we stay on this metaphor of the garden, we're going to take a pause right now and listen to this song by Matt Maher called Garden. Now, maybe the lyrics will be up there, but certainly on the back of your handout are the words so you can follow along.
You come meet me. All the blue fades away. The stars are waking. Your love so strong. I can't recall what was this thing they call the fall, and you walk with me. You never leave. You're making my heart a garden. Oh, why should I hide away from your face when the light of your love illuminates your hand in mine, a steady line drawn on my heart and deep in my mind, and you walk with me. You never leave. You're making my heart a garden. Broken are mending, the mournful rejoicing, seen through tears of peace overflowing, and you walk with me. You never leave. You're making my heart a garden.
On your sheet, there's some reflection questions. So look at them for a moment, and then I'd invite you to turn to someone near you for a couple of minutes and just do a little bit of sharing. Talk about what prayer is like for you. How were you taught how to pray when you were a child? How has that changed? And is it hard to see God or Jesus as a friend? And as you reflect and converse, there are paper leaves in the baskets at the end of the pews. Feel free to pass those around. And if during your reflection time, a word, an insight, maybe even a prompting of a prayer comes up, write it down on the leaf, and as you leave later this evening, hand it to a greeter or put it into the baskets out there, and we'll hang them on the tree that's in the narthex. So chat for a little while, and we'll come back together in a few minutes. Why don't we begin coming back together? I'm just curious, as we come together and you wrap things up, is there anyone who just wants to share just a brief anecdote? I'd be curious to hear, what is your experience of prayer? What have you grown up with? What have you been taught about prayer and about God? Yeah. Spontaneous. You can pray like that. You can just talk. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry. That she was with a friend in the car. Your mother, sorry. It was also hopefully a friend. And just started praying spontaneously. And she said, "Can you pray like that? Can you pray like that?" "Yeah, like a friend." "Of course you can pray like that." Yeah.
I was taught mindfulness, of being aware.
Mindfulness.
And so, as a kid, I was taught to say, "Please pray before meals." However, as I got older, I learned to just look at the food and be appreciative of how it was provided for, how lucky I was to live in a place where my parents could just put food on the table and other people were not as lucky as that. And to just be aware of, even if I didn't like it, that I had something to nourish me to take me on to the next day.
Mindfulness of the gifts, of the food, of your parents who provided for you, of God who provided it for you. Thank you. Awareness. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah. I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you next. Yeah.
We were taught that the 4 parts of prayer: adoration, worship, thanksgiving, supplication.
Right. Acts. Yeah.
But what keeps me going a lot of times, St. Augustine said, "He who sings prays twice."
He who sings prays twice. Yes, those are the traditional 4 forms of prayer, but I'd say there's thousands of ways of prayer, right? We have the tendency to limit. Thank you. We have the tendency to.
We follow.
How many microphones should we do? We tend to limit what prayer can be, which essentially is limiting our relationship with God, box God in. So we don't want to do that. Yeah.
I have a little story that some of my friends already know. But my husband, who passed away several years ago now, he was much more prayerful than I was. And every time that we met some friends and something happened, they said, "Pray for me." So when we sat down to pray, he would always say, "Pray for so-and-so because of this, and pray for so-and-so." And he spent hours. So I said, let's do something, let's try to pray for everybody, but do it in a way that we're not going to be only mentioning names and all of that. So we figured out, and we have a bowl, and I still have the bowl. And every time somebody asks for prayers, we put the name on a little piece of paper, and we put it in the bowl. And then we prayed for everybody in the bowl. And I
Practice.
so that it helps, right? And I still do it.
Good for you. Yeah. How many times do we say we'll pray for someone and go down? Maybe one more, if anyone. Yes. There you go.
As a little girl, I used to drive with my father to pick up my mother at work. And we would be talking, chit-chatting, and all of a sudden my dad would tell me, "Shh, shh, God is speaking to me. I'm listening to God." And to me has meant a lot to me, because sometimes we have to be quiet, and that's a form of prayer too, to be able to listen to him.
The still small voice, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate those shared experiences. I want to go back to this idea of prayer as seeing with new eyes, with God's eyes. This idea of awareness. Years ago, when I was working as a hospital chaplain in D.C., I was assigned to a unit where many of the patients were recovering from strokes and other neurological issues. And one day I went into the room of a man named Leroy, and he had suffered stroke on one side and was nearly paralyzed, but he could speak fine. He had no family nearby to come visit him, so he just lay there all day. And Leroy told me that he felt such self-pity in this state that he was in. He lay there feeling unloved and alone, untrusting of God. Why me? Was the question that he kept asking himself over and over again. Why would God allow this to happen to me? Not knowing completely what to say, I suggested that as part of his prayer, maybe he imagined God gazing down upon him, to maybe look through God's eyes and wonder what God sees. That's it, I told him. Imagine God gazing on you. Well, the next day I went in not expecting much, but he told me that he did what I suggested. And how was it? I asked. How was it imagining God gazing on you, looking through God's eyes at you? What did you feel? And he paused, and with tears in his eyes, he said, I felt loved. It turns out he prayed this way the entire day. His prayer to God was no longer words of self-pity or lament. His prayer became God's wordless gaze. His wordless gaze of love. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus encounters the rich young man who asks him what he must do to gain eternal life. And after the man says that he even follows the commandments and what more can he do, there's this line that says, Jesus, looking at him, loved him. Before Jesus responds, there's this pause, this moment of a loving gaze. When Pope John Paul II, years ago, visited the Supreme Patriarch of the Buddhists in Thailand, protocol was that before speaking, that they sit together and exchange benevolent glances, a loving gaze. There's something prayerful and sacred about that act. The next time you're in traffic. We're in Atlanta, right? You gotta mention it sometime. Next time you're feeling frustrated. Find someone and give them a benevolent glance. Imagine if all our politicians began all their meetings and negotiations by exchanging a benevolent glance. Nothing threatening, but an act of love. Right? What if? I find that taking a prayerful stance with others opens up our hearts, especially to people who we have a hard time with, you know? We'll talk more about this idea of reconciliation tomorrow, but in our garden of prayer, we cultivate a deeper self-awareness. We see those times when our glances instead come from resentment or anger or hate, when our hearts are closed to relationship. Now, my patient Leroy found his heart broken open with the loving gaze of God. Many of my other patients who found themselves broken open because of limitations of illness or suffering were moved to reconcile and make amends with loved ones. Sometimes having all that time in a hospital bed to reflect causes you to realize that the garden needs some replanting or some more watering. As Matt Marr sings in the song The Garden, all the broken are mending, the mournful rejoicing, seeing through tears of peace overflowing. When our hearts are moved by the divine encounter in prayer, we find ourselves moved to share that encounter of love with others. The shared project with God of tilling the garden means sharing the produce with others. Pope Francis says, when evangelizers rise from prayer, their hearts are more open, freed of self-absorption. They are desirous of doing good and sharing their lives with others. This is the way of the life of Christianity. It took me a while to dig deeper into my prayer relationship with God, from simply rattling through my prayers or asking for things, to a kind of being with God in prayer, which moves me to go out and love and live the gospel. This is our Christian pattern. We're considering bringing catechesis at the Good Shepherd to our parish, like yours has. And I went the other day to a CGS atrium at St. Catherine's Episcopal, and I asked one of the catechists how they use the liturgical calendar with the children. Well, the catechist told me we introduce the children to the rhythms of the church by talking first about the colors of the seasons. Purple is a season of preparation, Lent and Advent, followed by white for a season of celebration, Easter and Christmas, followed by green for ordinary time, a season of growth. Green is a fitting color for growth. Preparation, celebration, growth. It was a pattern that I hadn't quite thought of in that way before. Even in all my years of being a Catholic and even my theology degree, it didn't click until that moment the other day. This season of Lent is a season of preparation. For what? For our hearts, for the gift of Christ's resurrection, for redemption and reconciliation. But perhaps just as important a season is ordinary time. That season that seems ordinary for us in many ways, where it seems not much is happening. But that is where growth happens, in the secret, sometimes without us noticing. It's where the slow work of God occurs, where we can take the seeds of Lent and Easter and let them sprout. This is what prayer does, right? Prayer is scattering seeds. Jesus said, a man scatters seed in his field. He sleeps at night, is up and about during the day, and all the while the seeds are sprouting and growing. Yet he does not know how it happens. The growth is the abundant grace of God, creating new from our own participation in our relationship with God. Can we overdo the garden metaphor? Perhaps. And we may tomorrow and the night after. But I'm not the first. Jesus uses agricultural metaphors over and over and over again. It's what his people would understand. And so this time of Lent is a time for tilling new soil, for planting seeds. And then we wait for the rain and sunshine, for God to do God's work in our hearts, eventually bringing an abundance of fruit. So perhaps this season is a time of spiritual assessment. Not in a forced way that stirs up guilt or an unhealthy sense of religious obligation, but an observation of our prayer, what that means for you, your image of God, your relationship with God, your faith practice, what you believe, the way you live. How is God calling you to pray well, to move into a new, fresh place in your prayer? Before closing, I'd like to end with one of my favorite prayers from the Jesuit paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, called Patient Trust. And you're welcome to follow along. It's on your handout. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything, to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill, will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. Amen. Just one word before our music, and Father Ray will come up here again. We have a table in the back. We're selling some of my books for $10. We accept card or cash, preferably card. And there's also some information if you'd like to learn more about Ignatius House.
He is my song.
closed, and let's stand if you don't mind. Now kneel, now stand. Kneel, stand. This is a song called We Believe. We've sung it a few times in liturgy. Simple, powerful. Let's sing it together in this time.